Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. But I really wanted to. Right. Because I know there's a lot of people that came that actually like, and so I mean, we were in, I was in. Yeah. Like, I knew that was the big one. Like, whatever was said, we'll find it was nice. But for me, it was mostly just like, yeah. So what do you do? I don't know who else knows. I've been thinking about other things that we're going to maybe the too.
We have some name recognition going in.
Yeah, and then that's how to use and like just like look out and it's really.
I might.
Yeah. 45 minutes, you have a Q&A. So like the question is, if you want to share with the app.
Good evening, everybody. Hi. Well, welcome. I hate to interrupt good table conversation, but I also, because it's like a revel. It's like a bubble bath. It's like a bubble bath. It's a whirlpool bath, right? You get in, it's massaging. It's like massaging the spirit, hear all the conversations. My name is Chris Green. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Loyal Jones Appalachian Center. And before Ansel introduces our guest tonight, I'd just like to let people know, of course, that the restrooms are down to the end of the hall. I would like to remind people that if you have a friend in your pocket, that to help it be a little quieter there, I always have to remember to turn mine on and off, because I turn it off and then my wife's like, why didn't you have your phone on? I'm like, because I was turning it off for an event. And I will also like to let people know that over here, if you are not on our mailing list and you would like to be for for our series here or some other things about Appalachia that we occasionally share in the region, this is a sign up for our quilt list. And so if people are interested in this, they can put their name there and then you'll be on our newsletter that we send out. We also send out a newsletter 2 or 3 times a year, which is really a report from our students about what they've seen and have been experiencing too. Let's see, do I have anything else? We are going to be live streaming, so smile brightly. You never know who's going to be seeing the back of your head there too. Okay, thank you everybody, and I'm going to turn it on over to Ansel.
Hi everyone, I'm Ansel Elkins. I teach poetry and creative writing here. I'm really thrilled to introduce Jeff Bary, who is the sweet family chair and professor of physics and astronomy at Colgate University. He's a native of the town of Welch, located in the southern coal fields of West Virginia, where he developed a childhood fascination with astronomy that would lead him to a career as an observational astronomer who studies the formation of stars and planetary systems. He's a graduate of Emory and Henry College and Vanderbilt University. As a member of the Appalachian Studies Association, his scholarly and advocacy work now includes an exploration of the role a dark night sky plays in the construction of our sense of place in Appalachia. And last spring, Dr. Bary organized the first ever symposium of its kind, Dark Skies in Appalachian Identity, Culture, and Sense of Place. And I was really proud that 3 of our Berea College English majors and creative writing minors presented the poems that they'd written, exploring their own connections to night sky. And that Dark Skies conference, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, because it brought together astronomers, documentary filmmakers, dancers, writers, musicians, English professors, and astrophotographers, which is not something I knew much about at all. And it was really thrilling to see the ways in which the arts and sciences were braided together and the possibilities of interdisciplinary collaboration. And after that, I really found that symposium a deeply transformative experience that, I still have been thinking about those connections and conversations and filled up so many, random notes that I took, that ideas that popped up around the importance of dark skies. And I think about also the issue of dark skies and light pollution really is only something that has occurred to me in the last couple of years. When I think about my own childhood in rural Alabama and how much the darkness gave me the ability to feel the stars, not just see them, but really feel them, the richness of it and the deep connection to starlight that our ancestors have had for all of human history. And I realized that these increasing bright lights in which we all live under has equated, at least to me, as a spiritual loss. And I realized that, it's really in the poems that my students are writing, like Leaf, or I'm sorry to embarrass you, really thinking about the right like what right do we have to darkness as human beings? And, how can we fight to reclaim our kinship with the night? So please help me in welcoming Dr. Jeff Bary.
Wow. Thank you for that introduction. I don't know if I deserve that, but I'll take it. All right. I'm an astronomer, an astrophysicist, and when I give talks, I have a PowerPoint slide, I have plots and graphs and numbers, and I don't have any of that tonight. And what's more, I've written down most of what I'm going to say, which is also exceedingly unusual for an astronomer. So I'm kind of going to go back and forth. Oh, thanks. Between slides and reading and maybe ad-libbing a little bit. And this is one of the most wide-ranging talks I think I've ever given. So here we go. All right, so I was a shy kid. The kind of shyness that comes from a lack of self-confidence and thinking you don't have anything important to say. Thankfully, I had an older brother who was the exact opposite and did a lot of the talking for me. Today, I like to think that I'm over my shyness, that I have grown out of it, but it's still there. I still occasionally hear the voice of that shy little boy growing up in a small Appalachian town that unfortunately lacked any strangers. Not wanting to put himself out there, not wanting to be so bold as to think that a collection of people might be interested in anything that he has to say. So it remains a challenge for me to share my ideas that are so much a reflection of who I am and to accept the vulnerability that comes with it. So alas, though, that is exactly what I'm about to do. So I grew up in Welch, and that's a picture of Welch taken from probably the bypass that goes around town. It's the county seat of McDowell County. The town sits nestled into these steeply rising banks and hillsides adjacent to the Tug Fork River, which is kind of over there off to the left, which you'll see shortly, and Elkhorn Creek. In the center there, if you've been to Welch, there's a famous, the courthouse is pretty famous. So I'll say a little bit more about that, but that sits almost right in the center. This is what it looked like just a couple of days ago.
Oh my God.
And that was not when it crested. That's the Tug Fork right there. The Tug Fork goes right behind my house. It crested at 30 feet. It was a record flood. It's the biggest flood we've ever had. It has not really made the news yet, though, which is a reflection of what's always happened in my part of the state of West Virginia. And here's another picture. And that's really downtown. And that is after the floodwaters had receded. I don't think my house would have been flooded. My parents don't live there anymore. My grandparents are all gone. We don't have any close kin there. But my house would have been safe. So front porch of our house sat 15 feet back from a narrow shoulderless road, which today sees its fair share of hulking 18-wheelers weighted down with heaping loads of black coal. Behind our house, the creek bank fell off sharply into the Tug. The neighbors across the road lived in houses perched 40 feet or so above street level. There's my next door neighbors across the street, up the hill. The uncommon nature of the topography of my home environment seemed to me as nothing extraordinary. Till one summer, I had some college friends from Emory and Henry home for a visit. One afternoon, as we were all piling out of the house, my neighbor across the street and up the hill fired up his lawnmower. Now, I had grown up watching Carl cut his grass by lowering the mower down the hill with a rope cleverly tied to its handle. So I paid him no mind. But my friends from Chattanooga and Gate City and even Clintwood had never seen anything of the like. Carl's rope technique for cutting his lawn was a revelation, if a humorous one. So when I first began thinking about the concept of sense of place in Appalachia, this experience was one of the first things to come to mind. And the fact that not everyone has a neighbor that cuts their grass by lowering a lawnmower down their yard with a rope. So So how does an experience inform my sense of place, or how does that experience form my sense of place? In order to answer this question, I first need to define sense of place and at least consider the aspects of a place that helps a person form their own sense of that place. One of the first books I read concerning the topic was Tal Stanley's The Poco Field. It's an American, let me get that right. The Poco Field, An American History of Place, is set in McDowell County. He defines a person's sense of place as the result of a prolonged interaction and interrelationship between three complex realities, which include the natural environment, the built environment, and human culture and history. And as you would expect, the natural environment means the topography, the geology, the resources of a place. And for those of us from Welch, the tree-covered hills that rise so steeply from the edges of the rivers are an essential component of the natural environment in my hometown. The built environment includes a human response and appropriation of the land and resources for subsistence, profit, and power. And this would include large houses perched on hillsides, in addition to the roads and railroads that snake along rivers, and the mountains become as recognizable as a piece of this place as the mountains themselves. So too are the abandoned buildings. And here's, or now vacant lots in some cases, that once lined the main street of Welch, and the coal tipples that line stretches of routes 16 and 52. And just so you all know that Welch has not always looked like that. That is the same shot of the street. And the Pocahontas Theater pictured there burned down when I was, like 5 or 6 years old. Of course, they didn't build it back, so we didn't have a theater in town when I was growing up. But they used to refer to Welch as Little New York. And that picture kind of like proves the point. So the third reality, human culture and history, describes the way of life of a place and are the result of the interactions between people and these natural and built environments. In the coal fields during my childhood, life revolved around the coal industry, education, healthcare, or the lack thereof, and economic struggle. At the time, I could infer a bit of the history of this place from some of the last names of friends and family. There were the Kowaleskis, who were Polish, the Switches, who were Ukrainian, and then there were the Batalias, who were referred to as the Batlows, the Bevilacquas, who were actually called the Barleys, the Malamachis, the Muscatellos, the Quattrokis, the Quattrones, and the Bary, which is now Bary, which is my last name. There were also plenty of folks with names that could be traced to slave-owning families in the South, such as the Callahans, the Smiths, the Harrises, the Harristons. The coal fields of McDowell County were a melting pot, populated by foreign-born immigrants and African Americans who, during the Great Migration, ended up in the area to mine coal. My sense of this place is informed by this hardworking milieu of peoples whose history includes courageous escapes from poverty and war in far-off lands and racial terror in this land. The blatant exploitation of these people and their labor at the hands of the coal industry and its Gilded Age barons like Justice Collins and Edward Julius Berwyn was not part of my 8th grade West Virginia Studies class. Nor was the assassination of Matewan Sheriff Sid Hatfield on the steps of the county courthouse by C.E. Lively and his fellow Baldwin Felts detectives. Steps that I climbed nearly every day during high school as part of my part-time job as a file clerk for a lawyer in town. As I recall, I was led to believe that since the Baldwin Felts gun thugs, who were referred to as detectives, were responsible for gunning down Smiling Sid, that meant that he was the one on the wrong side of the law. My place comes with a rich and fascinating history, and the ways in which that history has been intentionally obscured is an undeniable part of this aspect of my sense of place. And I hope that as I describe this history of Welch and McDowell County, you were thinking about similarities between the history of my place and the history of your own. Unfortunately, many places have stories such as these, that those in power would prefer to be scrapped or rewritten to preserve and support their political and economic power. All right, so while scholarship abounds on the relationship between the natural environment and the construction of sense of place, little seems to have been written about the influence of the night sky as a fundamental part of the natural environment. Most of this work focuses on rivers and lakes, coasts and marshes, mountains and valleys, and plants and animals. But when it comes to the sky, either nighttime or daytime, a quick search yields few results. I did find a fairly recent paper titled The Other Blue, Role of the Sky in the Perception of Nature by a team of researchers affiliated with the Max Planck Institute in Berlin and published in the Frontiers of Psychology in October 2022. Their work seeks to expand the aspects of nature that may be included with the many restorative effects the natural environment has been shown to have on our mental and physical well-being. They are studying whether or not people perceive the sky as part of the natural environment, and if so, under what conditions. They conclude that there does exist a positive association with the sky as being part of nature, although the strength of that association depends on how much of the sky that you can see. So what seems to be overlooked in these explorations of the natural environment and sense of place is the quality of the nighttime sky. So I've spent some time thinking about why this would be the case. Isn't a truly dark sky with stars so bright that you feel like you could reach out and touch them, an absolutely awe-inspiring sight? One of the first times I experienced a truly dark, moonless night sky, I was about 9 years old at a Boy Scout camp in Russell County, Virginia. It was about this time that I latched on to the idea, a dream really, of one day becoming an astrophysicist. And I clearly remember standing by the edge of a small pond and looking up and being able to clearly distinguish the brilliant reddish color of Betelgeuse in the shoulder of Orion, Orion the hunter. The brilliant reflection of the stars from the still waters of the pond, I remember. And there are reasons that, though, even though I was growing up in the heart of Appalachia, in a town that was hemorrhaging people, I still had to travel nearly 2 hours to have that experience. And it all comes back to Carl, my neighbor who cut his grass with a rope. In this picture here, in between those two houses, and I guess I should have pointed this out, but this was Carl's lawn. As you can see, Carl is no longer with us because of the grass is definitely taking over. But there was a light pole in between those two houses, his personal street light, if you will, and it was bright and white and it buzzed. Yeah, so the height and position of that street light, whose constant buzzing was just as obnoxious as the bright white light that washed over the entirety of my little postage stamp of a front yard, made it impossible to see more than a handful of the brightest stars in our narrow river of sky that stretched from mountaintop to mountaintop. Instead of having memories of standing out and looking up in my own yard, I remember doing so in my grandparents' yard across town, often doing so with the aid of my grandfather's hunting binoculars. And I would scan the sky for just fuzzy objects standing out in his yard. And the Orion Nebula, pictured here that I got the little arrow pointed to, is something that I always come back to. And it's something that I've studied actually as an astronomer now. So there's this really cool connection for me to think that something that had just captured my imagination as a kid is something that I spend time worrying about today. So is one of the reasons that a dark night sky is not part of the scholarship related to sense of place is that few people have the opportunity to experience a truly dark sky. And I say, well, perhaps. If this is the case, then one must consider our culture or even our civilization's relationship with darkness. I would argue that progress and civilization asks us not to only see ourselves as having control of the natural world, but also requires us to see ourselves as distinct from it. Nature is something we visit rather than something that we inhabit. Places that are deemed uncivilized are simply untouched by human control. And in general, we learn to fear or develop a sense of foreboding of wild places and spaces. For instance, if I use the phrase a dark and uninhabited wood, say it like that, you may think that I am about to tell you a scary short story. A dark anything conjures something frightening and a sense of something in need of being tamed or developed or well lit. As for dark woods, the uncivilized old growth forests in Appalachia and beyond were clear cut in the late 1800s and early 1900s, rendering these unruly places lifeless and barren, but arguably more civilized and non-threatening. The same may be said for humanity's modern approach to nighttime. Since the development of artificial lighting in the late 1800s, the civilized world has sought to take control of the night. Modern cities are extremely well lit, allowing nearly as much activity that occurs during the daylight hours to continue long after the sun has set. New York, the city that never sleeps, has been considered for decades to be the quintessential modern city and a testament to progress and civilization. For growing cities in the US and around the world, a marker of progress is how well they can ignore our diurnal rhythms and effectively render night into day. To this point, recent satellite studies of worldwide sky brightnesses, which is what is shown here, by Falke et al. 2016, indicate that more than 80% of the world and more than 99% of the US and European populations live under light-polluted skies. The Milky Way is hidden from more than 1/3 of humanity, including 60% of Europeans and nearly 80% of North Americans. And that was 9 years ago. I imagine it's gotten worse. And I'm about to explain how it's gotten worse. So Kiba et al. 2017 observations monitoring found that sky brightnesses worldwide was increasing at a rate of 2% yearly. Now, surprisingly, they also found that light pollution in Europe and North America had remained constant or was even decreasing slightly. But these measurements were still a cause for concern, but didn't suggest that the problem was getting worse in an accelerated fashion. Unfortunately, these measurements were found lacking since the detectors that produced that image were not sensitive to shorter wavelength light that was being emitted by the newer LED bulbs that everybody was installing. And these were the ones that were rapidly replacing older low and high pressure sodium and fluorescent bulbs. So what you can see in this picture right here is a prediction of how a change to LED lights was going to affect sky brightnesses from here to here. And I think, so if you all buy light bulbs, LEDs, you might see these numbers on them. Yeah. You don't know what number you should get. 2700, yes, lower. 2700 is probably what you would want to have in your house or even outside too. But typically the ones that most municipalities were installing when they started to make the switch, because they sip electricity comparatively speaking, they rushed in and put in these 4,000 Kelvin bulbs. I think those were the ones that they first started making in they were mass producing at first. So it was the ones that became cheaper. And then those were the ones that everybody sort of installed. And it turns out to have been a bit of a mistake. So, all right. A more recent citizen science study called The Globe at Night used ground-based measurements of sky brightness, which were more sensitive to the blue light and therefore picked up on the light that was being emitted by all these new LEDs. Used more than 50,000 sky brightness observations conducted by citizen scientists. And in Kiba et al. 2023, they published their work, and it revealed that light pollution is more pervasive and is increasing at a rate of 10% now from year to year. And this means that at this rate, the light pollution will double every 8 years. And so essentially, just to really get nerd out on y'all for just a second, this is a spectrum of the light that's being produced by that light on my college campus. And so I've been not so successfully fighting this fight on my own campus. And what you want to stay away from are lights that have this really sharp, skinny peak around 450 nanometers. That's a really blue light. And what makes those LEDs appear white is kind of the combination of the blues that you get out of here and then the yellows, oranges, and reds that you get from this broader kind of hump. If you get a 2700 Kelvin bulb, this little peak right here goes almost to zero. Right, and so you do away with those photons. Those photons are also not good. While I'm on my soapbox, those photons are also not good for you. Right, they're the ones that will keep you up. They're the ones that suppress melatonin production. And so you don't want to have a light that has this type of underlying spectrum. All right. That's your science lesson, maybe the only one for the night. So when I first arrived at Colgate, Anthony Avini, internationally renowned archaeoastronomer, actually one of the founders of the discipline, an expert on Mesoamerican cultures such as the Maya, was a member of my department. He studied and did a lot to reveal the integral role the night sky played in the lives of indigenous people of this region, Mesoamerica, as well as in other indigenous and ancient cultures spanning the globe. Where people once saw a reflection of life on Earth played out in the heavens, our modern scientific process seems to be creating knowledge and our basic ways of interacting with nature have reduced the once relatable universe to a lifeless, inanimate backdrop, lacking any immediacy or connectivity. In his popular book, People in the Sky, Tony laments the modern world's lost intimacy with the sky. He infers that their astronomy, as in the Maya, was lived as much as practice. And much of what our predecessors included in its domain served what we might regard as social and religious rather than just scientific purposes. These cultures lived with the sky filled with representations of life on Earth that were both tangible and familiar. All right, so this is when I said wide-ranging, I mean wide-ranging. So at Colgate, I have come to teach a class about Galileo, the Catholic Church, and the nature of modern science. 415 years ago, when Galileo pointed the telescope at the sky, saw mountains on the moon, a multitude of stars in the Milky Way, and never before seen stars orbiting Jupiter, it upended what everyone knew about the nature of the universe. And people all across Europe, from monarchs and emperors to stonemasons and bakers, would have heard about the discoveries. And Galileo helped spread the word by writing his findings in the local vernacular instead of the more academic Latin. So a couple years ago, I had the incredible opportunity to spend a month and a half living and working in Florence. As a student of this particular history that focused in part on this town known as the Cuore del Rinascimento, or the heart of the Renaissance, I felt a particularly special connection to the sky, the one that Galileo would have studied upon returning to his native Tuscany from having been abroad and teaching at the University of Padua for 18 years. It just so happened that during my stay in Florence, there was a conjunction of Venus and Jupiter in the early evening sky just after sunset. And the two brightest lights in the sky besides the sun and the moon were going to pass within a half a degree of each other. So what I was doing while I was there is I was this is Santa Maria Novella, which is the Dominican church on one side of town. And my apartment that I was staying in was very close to Santa Maria Novella. So I would come out of my apartment, sometimes walk in the piazza in front of Santa Maria Novella, walk down the Arno, past the Ponte Vecchio, past Palazzo Vecchio, which is the tower there. I love this picture because there's the tower and then you see the crane, which just does not seem like it should be there. And that is the Uffizi, right? So this is the Piazzale degli Uffizi. So that's where all the great Renaissance art is kept. And then where I was going was up there on the hill where you see all those lights. There's a building up there that's lit, that's really white. That's San Miniato del Monte, which is where Benedictine order of monks are. And so I was going up there to get a good look of this conjunction. I was watching Jupiter and Venus night after night get closer and closer together. All right, let me get back to all right, so I knew that if this particular event had occurred during Galileo's day, he would have diligently observed with his homemade telescope the phase of Venus and noted the positions of Jupiter's moons. The dark night sky of Renaissance Florence would have been dominated by these major lights, but also speckled by numerous lesser lights of the vastly more distant stars. Galileo would not have been alone in observing such an important celestial event. Like me, the Florentines would have been watching the two planets grow ever closer with each passing day. So what I did was I would go up to Piazzale Michelangelo, and then I'd walk from there on up to San Miniato, which is a little bit higher, and you get a better view of things. And so I took this picture. Well, I think this was the day of the conjunction where they were at their closest. And you can see those kind of quintessential cypress trees in the picture. And so I'm going to zoom in because just the camera in my pocket is phenomenal. And hopefully you all can see the brighter light there is Venus and the fainter one is Jupiter. All right, so this celestial occurrence may have portended at the time of Galileo, may have portended an ominous event such as the death of a monarch or even a pope. But today it seems that civilization has moved on from its once intimate connection and fascination with the night sky, given that, as best I could tell, of the hundreds of people I would encounter at Piazzale Michelangelo and San Miniato del Monte, I alone was anxiously awaiting the appearance of Jupiter and Venus in the darkening sky. I think this is what everybody had come to see, which, I mean, can't really blame them. So this experience left me wondering if places still exist where people develop a connection to the night sky, where that connection would be recognized as a fundamental aspect of one's identity and sense of place. And if so, what would be the markers of such a connection? So this leads me back to Appalachia, home of some of the darkest skies remaining east of the mighty Mississippi, and to the time when I first started attending the yearly Appalachian Studies Conference in 2014. At the time, my goal was to develop a multidisciplinary course about Appalachia, which I could teach as part of Colgate's liberal arts core curriculum. This kind of crazy idea, it was sparked by a few events that all happened within a couple of years of my first ASA conference. One of those events happened here. So first, Lyle Roloffs, in addition to having been the provost and dean of faculty at Colgate when I was hired, also happened to be a colleague of mine in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. He called me out of the blue one day and invited me over to his house, to his and Laurie's house for a bourbon and to chat about Appalachia. And so Lyle had recently been hired as the 9th president of Berea College and just returned from one of his fact-finding tours through Eastern Kentucky, Southern West Virginia, and Southwest Virginia. And we chatted for a couple of hours. And for the first time since I'd been at Colgate, I started getting nostalgic for home. And then around the same time, I came across Colgate alumnus and Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Chris Hedges' book titled Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. The book focused on 4 sacrifice zones in the United States, one of which was centered on my hometown of Welch. And I ended up bringing Chris to campus to visit my class on Galileo, because I saw the connection there clearly. As part of his visit, I hosted a dinner at my house with faculty colleagues from a broad range of disciplines. And the dinner conversation sparked a series of events the following year that focused on Appalachia and mountaintop removal mining. It was intended to be timed with the impending decision as to whether or not New York State would allow hydraulic fracturing. They ended up not allowing hydraulic fracturing. But one of the things that I wanted to say to all my colleagues with this series of events was like, don't listen to them. It's not going to be safe. The industries cannot be trusted. And that's kind of what the series was about. So the multidisciplinary series included lectures, exhibits, and performances from scientists, sociologists, musicologists, artists, musicians, and activists. One of the presenters was Stephen Fisher. I don't know if anybody in here knows Steve, but maybe a couple people. Stephen Fisher was my political science 101 professor at Emory and Henry when I was a freshman. He was also one of the key figures in the formation of the Appalachian Studies Association, and whom happened to be one of Lyle and Laurie's mandatory stops on their fact-finding mission. So after organizing this series of events, the next logical step, at least in my mind, was to become part of the Appalachian Studies Association and start attending the yearly conference. So initially, I was attending as a student with the goal of developing this enough expertise to eventually teach that liberal arts course about Appalachia. And then I was like, well, maybe it should be just about Central Appalachia. And then I was like, well, maybe it should just be about West Virginia, because I learned it's a very big region and it's very diverse. And having a class just about Appalachia is really unrealistic. So the first meeting I attended was at Marshall University in 2014. And I fully expected to be a fish out of water. I mean, how many astrophysicists attend the ASA meeting? Historically, I would expect that number to be pretty small, like 0 or 1. So I anticipated getting there and not knowing anyone with exception of a few folks that I'd actually just brought to Colgate for that series. So I hadn't been stumbling around the conference for long when I heard my name being called by another Welch native, Mark Myers, a historian who had received his PhD at WVU and had studied with Ron Lewis. Once he got over his surprise to see me there, he introduced me to all of his fellow WVU historian friends, and I had a natural community. So since then, I've missed one ASA conference in the last 11 years. And every year it feels like a homecoming and a chance for me to recharge my batteries. So more relevant to this issue of dark skies, though, and sense of place, is the fact that there was a panel called Carpe Noctem, Night Sky Economic Development in Calhoun County, West Virginia, at the 2015 conference, my second conference. I'm somewhat embarrassed to say that I missed the panel, the one that most directly connected with my typical scholarly endeavors. But after the fact, I did get in touch with Tim Ezell and Kat Wilt, both at the University of Tennessee, to learn more about the project. And this eventually led to me joining them for a star party at the park in the fall of 2016, where I kind of gave a general talk about my research and learned about the project, met some of the community members that were leading it, and then saw firsthand just how incredibly dark the skies are at Calhoun County. Note that Calhoun County is far from interstates. It's not close to 64, which is really good, which keeps its sky really dark. One of the things that they also have there and have actually improved since they've been doing this project is they have excellent flat spaces that make for nice observing fields for amateur astronomers. They've recently constructed cabins in the park and have run electricity to the fields to aid amateurs who need power for their telescopes when they're out observing for long periods of time. So if you ever have a chance, you should go visit. It is a few hours from here, but it's a wonderful dark sky. All right, so you may be asking yourself, why should one care about this connection between identity and our ability to see the stars in the Milky Way? Well, it all comes down to the fact that if we don't care about our ability to stay connected to the night sky, we, humanity, will likely lose our connection with it entirely. We know from experience that when a historic building or a mountain or a park or a particular old tree is recognized as being a fundamental aspect of place or having played a fundamental role in its history, people will go to great lengths to defend them. And so my thinking goes, what if people, particularly those who live in rural parts of the country, where we find the last bastions of dark night skies, began to recognize that the starry night above their heads, which they may have spent most of their lives taking for granted, is actually part of their identity? Would they be willing to defend it if it were to be threatened? So how might this connect to my friends in Calhoun County? In addition to building out the infrastructure of the park, they also wanted to apply for a designation as a dark sky park through Dark Sky International, which is a nonprofit organization that works tirelessly to combat light pollution across the world. In order to earn one of these designations, though, the applicants must develop a plan to protect and preserve the quality of the skies for the foreseeable future. These plans typically include lighting ordinances that are adopted by nearby municipalities to minimize light pollution. And in some instances, I can imagine municipalities being resistant to such regulation. However, if people within these municipalities see the presence of a wonderfully dark sky as part of who they are and where they are from, I would suspect they would be willing to do little things that would protect the sky. This brings me back to the search for ways in which we might recognize the influence of dark skies on Appalachian identity and culture. And so in the spring of 2022, I submitted a proposal for a new endowed chair that was created at Colgate, which sought specifically to recognize and support a faculty member's continued scholarly development in new areas of intellectual inquiry through sustained immersion into knowledge beyond their current discipline. And I thought that sounded kind of perfect for this. So the proposal was an articulation of my ideas about the night sky, Appalachian sense of place, and a mixture of academic and public scholarship, which I feel is important to successful dark sky preservation and advocacy work. As I began to think about what my contribution to the scholarship should look like, I felt that the markers of how a dark night sky might be reflected by people in the region can come out in the many modes of artistic expression. For instance, do authors from the region regularly include allusions to the sky? Do songwriters find ways to work the sky into the lyrics of their songs? How about filmmakers, painters, sculptors, photographers, dancers? Oh, I robbed you all of a picture. This is a picture from Calhoun County of the Milky Way, and I don't think there's any special processing. That's a stacked image, so there are multiple images that increase the exposure time, overall exposure time, so you can see fainter structure. But yeah, that's what you can do with a dark sky. If the sky is not dark, you can't see things like that. So I began reading books and short stories and listening to songs written by authors and songwriters from the region, just kind of looking for references or mentions of the night sky. One of the first passages I came across was appropriately in Silas House's Lark Ascending. Lark, the protagonist, and his family have been dislocated by an extremist authoritarian regime that has taken control of the United States. Running from oppression and wildfires, they attempt to make a perilous journey across the Atlantic to Ireland for the promise of safety. During the journey, Lark recounts chatting with his mother and father under a dark, moonless sky. And he says, this is Lark recounting this in the book. Sometimes we gathered on the high rocks to watch the world spread out below us, the mountains fading away until they became sky, the lake below wide in daytime or streaked by the moon at night. There was no moon on this night, but there were so many stars that the sky was more gray than bluish black. We could see every star that had ever been. My mother explained how most of the stars we could see were already gone, but we could still see their light. I saw 3 shooting stars in a row slanting across the top of the sky. Before, we could have never seen a sky like this because of all the lights, my father said. And I think he says, what do you understand? It's a bit of a stretch. So as an astronomer here, let me correct a couple things. It's hopefully, I know Silas is not here, right? So it's a bit of a stretch or a bending of the truth to say we could see every star that ever had been. But from a literary perspective, it does help draw a picture. And as an astronomer, it is also my duty to point out that Lark's mother is incorrect in saying that most of the stars have died, despite the fact that we are still receiving their light. Many of these stars are nearby. Actually, most all of them aren't nearby, meaning that their light only travels hundreds or maybe thousands of years to reach us. Given that lifetime, given that their lifetimes are on the orders of hundreds of millions to tens of billions of years, it's unlikely that many, if any, have died in the last few hundred or thousand years. But that's just to make sure that I don't reinforce a very common misconception by sharing this quote. With regards to raising awareness of light pollution, though, Silas is clearly doing his part with the final point that Lark's father makes about how this sky was so different when all the lights used to be on. All right, so moving from one of my favorite authors to another one of my favorite authors, as I was reading Barbara Kingsolver's just absolute masterpiece, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Demon Copperhead, came across the following quote near the end of the book as Demon was giving a passionate description of his sense of place in his part of Appalachia. And when he gets to the night sky, he says, and stars, a sky as dark as sleep, not this hazy pinkish business. I'm saying a blind man's black. For a lot of us, that's medicine, required for the daily reboot. In 4 short sentences, Kingsolver says it all. The hazy pinkish business refers to the polluted skies of Knoxville. And unfortunately, the pinkish business is quickly being replaced by a hazy white glow, perhaps with a slight bluish tint. But that required for the daily reboot may very well be a nod to the fact that people need darkness. That may not come as a surprise that as a species that has evolved for millions of years to be diurnal, would, in the span of a few decades, be able to shift their sleep habits. So how about music? Moving from my favorite authors to music. So you all may not recognize these folks, but I started with some friends of mine that I know love to write about the stars and the sky and black holes. The sea are Chuck Costa and Mira Stanley Costa. They're a folk pop duo with some of the most beautiful harmonies you will hear really anywhere. Mira is a West Virginia native, and so that's the connection, having grown up in Charleston. Chuck grew up in New York City, but let's not hold that against him. Mira has told me that her fascination with the night sky started on an elementary school field trip to the Woodlands Mountain Institute on Spruce Knob, when she and her classmates slept on the floor of a Mongolian yurt that happens to have a window that opens onto the universe or this large oculus in its roof. Spruce Knob has some of the darkest skies in the state, even darker than Calhoun County's park. And it's not surprising that Mira discovered the night sky on this trip. And so they frequently work some astronomical objects or motifs into their songs. Hence, we're all spinning around a black hole in the song Fistful of Flowers from their debut album, Love We Are We Love. And then more recently in this album, Stumbling Home, they wrote a beautiful song about being adrift in obscurity, looking for connection with someone or something that might be out there listening too. a reference to making contact. All right. And then there's Jason Isbell. Jason Isbell is from Appalachian County in northern Alabama, who writes in the first track off of the album Nashville Sound, Last of My Kind. Couldn't be happy in the city at night. Can't see the stars for the neon lights. I know just about anybody could write about the stars, and I certainly have not done the type of research that would say that folks from parts of Appalachia are more likely than people who have been raised in the city and never had an opportunity to see a truly dark sky to incorporate it in their writing or really any mode of expression. While I suspect that this is likely the case, the very act of exploring the manifold ways in which creators of all stripes express their relationship with the night sky implicitly makes it a part of one's sense of place. All right, so buoyed by this new position and research funds and the time that came with it, I hosted this multidisciplinary symposium in April 2024 called Dark Skies in Appalachian Identity, Culture, and Sense of Place. As advertised, the symposium was dedicated to studying the ways a dark night sky influences identity and place by exploring its manifestation through many modes of human expression. After applying for every funding opportunity on campus, I invited a slew of folks that I thought had something interesting to contribute and put out a call for participation. So I first reached out to Elaine McMillian Sheldon, who had just released King Cole. I asked my former colleague, archaeoastronomer Tony Avini, who thankfully still lives in town and is always up for anything. I asked author Anne Pancake, who writes so evocatively about nature and place, to be the keynote speaker. And with a little help from my friend, Dr. Bill Turner, I convinced Crystal Good, poet, activist, journalist, and founder of Black by God, West Virginia, to join us. To address the issue of light pollution head on from an astronomer's perspective, I invited fellow astrophysicist and friend at Smith College, James Lowenthal, to talk about his decades of dark sky preservation work. From the municipality of Northampton, Massachusetts, to being the vice president of the International Astronomical Union's Commission for the Protection of Existing and Potential Observatory Sites. And then when I reached out to Elaine, she had just a few months earlier spent a few evenings documenting a group of astrophotographers in West Virginia. So I invited a couple of them, Abraham Jones, who is not pictured here, and Dave Green, who is the guy with the big beard. And you've actually seen a bunch of pictures that Dave has taken in my presentation already. Dave Green is a former coal miner and now works as a part of a mine rescue team. And like I said, I've shown multiple images of his. And yet another. This is Droop Mountain Battlefield, and that is Dave that he's managed to get himself into his own picture. So I invited my friends to see the sea as well as wild ponies, who also have strong connections to Appalachia, and I know have a deep affinity also for the sky. Danny Schmidt in the middle there is one of the smartest songwriters I know, and I knew he would have something special to contribute. And everyone I asked said yes. And then, as if the stars had not aligned enough, Silas House visited Colgate in the fall of 2023 as part of a class called Living Writers. We had a moment to chat before a fancy dinner at the president's house. And when I told him about this project, he mentioned the work that his colleague Ansel Elkins is doing with her creative writing students. And so I reached out and invited Ansel, who said yes, and that she would like to bring some of her students to the symposium. So in a meeting filled with beautiful and powerful moments, none was better than Ansel and her students reading their poetry. Just to give a sense of the wide range of disciplines represented at the symposium, I've included my other colleague, Wan Chun Liu, on here. He presented his work studying the effects of artificial light on the behavior of zebra finches, which they have been determined to have some neurological features or processes very similar to humans. So for the finale of the symposium, Amy Dawson and Mike Costello from Lost Creek Farms in West Virginia made the dinner for the banquet. Their cuisine is firmly rooted in Appalachia and place. Each dish came with a story related to the history of the region. And the dinner was a celebration of place through the food and stories of Appalachia. So the intent of the program was for it to be a multidisciplinary and rooted in place, but with an appropriate level of flexibility that allowed for a broad range of voices and participants to contribute. What did we learn about sense of place in dark skies in Appalachia? Well, we learned that bringing together a group of people with vastly different expertise, unified by a common interest, can make for quite magical interactions. We learned that the night sky is an endless source of inspiration. We learned that indigenous people from North America to Mesoamerica had an actual relationship with the night sky. We learned that being exposed to too much artificial light at night, particularly shorter wavelength light, can disrupt the circadian rhythms of people and may pose a growing and significant threat to our long-term health. The disruption to sleep alone may very well lead to a host of health effects like depression, obesity, and cancer, to name a few. So we learned that too much light at night can disrupt the flight of migrating birds that need darkness as many navigate by stars. Sea turtle hatchlings can become disoriented by our artificial light on the shores that draw them away from the water. We learned that scientists are in the process of studying the effects of artificial light at night on a vast array of flora and fauna, with early indications being that it is disruptive to many species and likely detrimental to most. We know that light is intended to allow us to see where we are going, but the nature of many light fixtures allow large fractions of the light they produce to scatter upward and away from where it is needed most. So we learned that there are efficiencies with regards to lighting practices that will have the quadruple benefit of saving energy, money, keeping us healthier, and protecting one of humanity's first and most intimate connections to the natural world of which we are dependent. So I took these two pictures from an airplane just to give you a sense. And the one that astonished me, of course, I think is on the left here. That one is saturated, meaning that I just took a regular, like quick, but this is not a long exposure at all. And the light coming from whatever that was on the ground, I was at 25,000 feet or something like that. It's still saturated. There's no need. The planes don't need that to be able to see to fly, right? So, but this is not uncommon. It's quite typical. The other thing that you can see is the difference in colors for some of these lights. You can see some of the street lights are looking really blue. So you can see the newer ones from the older ones. So I would say that these old ones have not been replaced. These are newer ones that are the bluer colored LEDs. All right, so finally, if I can transport you back to the hill overlooking Florence, where I watched the conjunction of Venus and Jupiter alone while surrounded by hundreds of people. In the course I teach about Galileo, as the semester comes to a close, I will ask my class to consider what we lose if there are no longer facts that we can agree upon and understandings that we would have previously defined as truth is no longer discernible. So I don't think we have to treat this as a hypothetical any longer, and we are in the middle of running that particular experiment right now. However, with regards to humanity's longstanding connection to the night sky, what do we stand to lose, or what may we be losing as the stars slowly fade away from our consciousness? Many of us have few opportunities to be awed by nature, or in this case, the universe, and have our perspective and worldview shaped by those interactions. I would argue that a perspective shaped by these experiences is one that will connect people rather than divide them. We all share the sky, and more likely than not feel a deep sense of wonder when confronted with our origins, as well as the vastness of our little corner of the universe. As one of my favorite Appalachian artists, Amethyst Kia, writes in her song, Empire of Love, because I don't want a theocracy or some idol ideology. We're all made from stars from above. I pledge allegiance to my soul. I follow where she needs to go. Or by Brooklyn-based singer-songwriter Anna Eggy, writes in her song, We Are One, about standing in the path of a total solar eclipse. We were all looking up in the same direction. We gathered together all around the world to watch the moon block the sun. And in that moment, looking up, we were one. Civilization's lost connection to the night sky is just one in a long line of events that have pushed us to look further and further inward, dangerously detaching from the world and disconnecting from the people around us. The endless self-promotion by our growing addiction to social media and the bootstrap fantasy tied to the American dream and American capitalism, the culture of fear of other people manufactured by news outlets and political actors as a means to monetary gain and political power all promote, if not celebrate, a withdrawal from the collective. And so I'm not suggesting that this loss alone has precipitated such a withdrawal. Instead, it is just one aspect of our culture's march towards some poorly defined notion of progress that seems to be eroding what it has meant to be human for generations, reaching back through thousands of years of human history. The connection I felt looking upon the conjunction of Venus and Jupiter and Galileo's sky brings me such joy, a joy that stems from knowing that this was the same place that such a complicated and consequential figure in the history of astronomy, science, and religion experienced very similar emotions while establishing a new cosmic order. And while the folks around me were clearly having a shared experience as they looked down upon the old city of Florence, they benefit from the considerable efforts that have gone into preserving this Renaissance town so that it can be enjoyed for our generation and generations to come. So I must say that I'm the happy recipient of those efforts. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for preserving the darkness of the night sky. Galileo's sky, as well as that of the Cherokee and the Shawnee and Smiling Sid Hatfield, is being essentially erased. And with it goes a part of our humanity, a piece of us. And for those of us that have called Appalachia home, a part of our identity and what it means to be Appalachian.
I think we have time for a few questions, and I have a microphone here for anybody who would like to ask.
You know, got a lot of words from me tonight. Thanks for sitting through all that.
Yes, thank you for your presentation, Jonathan. Here, with your presentation and the things that you do, what part of the country have you been where you'll find, I guess, the night sky would be the most presentable, besides the one that you was already shown, the flat?
Yeah. Well, you know, with the best way to kind of show that is to go back to that picture that I showed you, the light pollution map. So for the U.S., you can see where all the people live, right? The places that are like almost white, those are the places that are most polluted. The places that are bluish are the places where you don't have as much light pollution. And so the little patches of blue here are going up through Appalachia into the Adirondack Park and then into Maine. And then if you look on the western side of the country, it's a lot better, but it's so much sparsely populated. So you can find places out there. And of course, as professional astronomers, we put a lot of telescopes down here in the southwest. So New Mexico has some telescopes, Arizona has some telescopes. And then there's some over in California that are now being threatened by wildfires in addition to so but these little blue spots over here are precious east of the Mississippi, which is not grab the mic. Oh, yeah, all right.
Can you speak to the added threat from constellation satellites? Sorry.
Yeah, that is oh man. Yeah, so they keep launching thousands of these things, and Starlink just keeps launching them, sometimes multiple launches per week. And so it's going to be a real issue. Like if you want to go out, if you're just an amateur astronomer, even if you're just trying to take some astrophotography stuff, you're going to have tons of these satellites passing through your field of view. If you're a professional astronomer, our telescopes are not cheap. The time that we get on telescopes is really valuable, and to have that corrupted by satellites is a real. It's going to take a real toll on what we do. I have two former students that are now working on these issues. Lindsay DeMarkey, who made it to the symposium, she had been working in John is it John Hickenlooper? Jack Hickenlooper. Yeah, she was in his office as a legislative aide, and she, before she left, had written a piece of legislation trying to regulate those satellite constellations, and it was submitted. Of course, they may not actually bring it out of a committee to vote on it, but yes. So I know a little bit of that. I know how hard of a problem that's going to be because there's absolutely no regulation associated with that.
Thank you. In that slide you're showing there, how much of that light pollution is attributed primarily to outdoor lighting?
Ooh. I would say the majority of it is coming from outdoor lights. I mean, you get some light that spills out of buildings, but I would say the majority is coming from outdoor lights.
Years ago, at least it seems like it was many years ago, there was an effort to, or at least talk about, so-called security lights and so forth, having shields on top and that sort of thing. I haven't heard anything about that in forever. Is that still an initiative anywhere?
Oh, it should be. I mean, every light that you put up outside should be shielded. So it should definitely be, it should not only be part of the conversation, it should be accepted as like, this is the best practice in terms of like putting a light up. But it's not, right? And I just had a conversation with the Municipal Utilities Commission folks in my little village, and I thought we should have a lighting ordinance to give some guidance, really, to let people know what the right thing to do is, because there may be folks who really want to do the right thing in terms of putting up lights, but they don't know exactly what to do. So having a lighting ordinance would actually give them a guide in a sense. But they were very resistant. So that's going to be a process.
So street lights, any kind of outdoor lighting like that would make a big difference.
Huge difference. And then the other thing is that they don't need to be as bright as they are typically. One of this came up in my conversation with the municipal folks. They put this one exceedingly bright light next to a crosswalk, and crosswalks are supposed to get more light, right? But in terms of the measurement units, it's like 20 lux, 10 to 20 lux is what you should measure for a brightness. I went out and measured that light, and I was getting 80 to 90. And so if you take 10 as what you should use, it's like 8 to 9 times brighter than it needs to be. And then if they're too bright, there's glare that comes off of those lights. And I know as I get a little bit older, light scatters in my eye a lot more than it used to, right? And so headlamps get to be an issue from other cars, and the blue light that they now put in the headlamps. And of course, the blue light actually scatters more easily. So you get more light pollution from bluer colored lamps as well. You also get blinded more easily by blue light coming from headlamps. I don't know who's going to tackle that. They need to regulate that and go back to a warmer color light for the headlamps, because that's not necessarily making you safer, because if you blind the person that's coming towards you, yeah.
We have time for one more question over here.
Hi, Dr. Bary. My wife and I moved here from Cincinnati and chose our site for our house largely because the ordinance of that one street says no streetlights. And so that was great. I have got a little observatory deck in the back. And amazing to me, somebody actually built a house and put a pole light in the farmer's field, in the middle of the farmer's field behind our house.
Yeah.
And so I've been dealing with the utility about that. And what surprised me is they sent somebody out to talk to us about that. And the person who came out was completely ignorant about full cutoff light fixtures and the International Dark Sky, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But he seemed very interested. So I'm wondering if one approach might be to actually go to the utilities and say, here's a way, A, to save money, B, to keep people being mad at each other because they light each other's rooms up at night, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I really, just raising awareness, I think will go a long way, right? And people don't have to sacrifice anything, really. to light things responsibly still means that they're going to be well lit and they're going to be safe. They're probably going to be safer, right? So it's really a win-win. And then you have the added benefit of saving money and preserving the sky and probably helping people's health too, because if we're using those blue lights, it really is looking like that's long-term health effects of that exposure is not going to be good.
We attended a conference in 2011, and there was a cardiologist, and it was an astronomy conference. And he was talking about, especially breast cancer is very, very much of a risk factor when people that are over lighted areas, because apparently melatonin that develops in your brain when you're sleeping doesn't. And the melatonin is a fighter against cancer.
Well, the thing is, our bodies start to release melatonin when we're about to go to sleep. And the blue light actually suppresses that production of the melatonin. And so it makes it harder for you to go to sleep. So the students on my campus, there are these new lights that have gone up that I didn't get to have a say in like what color they were. And so they're 3,500 Kelvin. They still have a significant peak of blue emission, and they're right outside the dorms. And I just worry about these kids. I don't know if the kids, I mean, everybody I've talked to, until you mention it to them, they're like, oh, I just thought I just had to live with that. And I'm like, well, no, I don't think you should have to live with that.
Well, it sounds as if, my fellow Bereans, we have some kind work of information to give people. Before we say goodbye, I will let people know that if you keep the cups on the tables, we'll collect them because I recycle as much as I can here. And also, I would beg of you, I forgot to set these out, come scan one with your phone, because the way we get to do this is we get to show the college how good our programming is. And if we don't show it, they're like, you're not doing a very good job, are you? So, of course, some of that is I forget to ask people too. So these will be over here too. So I ask you to do that. And thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much.